for your first entry, and then $10 after that if you're interested. The festival would not be possible without all the sponsors that are located on the back of the book, so check those out right there. Well, it's my honor to introduce our speaker today, Patrick Hicks. He has authored many books, including Adoptable, In the Shadow of Dora, and then The Commandant of Lubitsch. However, you say that, thank you. And 2023's Across the Lake, which I think we're hearing about today. Perfect. His work has appeared on NPR, PBS NewsHour, and American Life and Poetry. Hicks has won grants from the Bush Foundation and National Endowment for the Humanities, and he was a finalist for an Emmy. He is a writer in residence at Augustana University here in South Dakota, and a faculty member in the MFA program at the University of Nevada, Reno, and Lake Tahoe. So please welcome Patrick.
Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it because we're spoiled with all of the different panels that you could go to, so I'm very grateful that you're here and you walked up the hill and the rain has stayed away. So I'm very grateful for your time and the gift of your time. And this particular novel is 4 years in the making, and this is the very first public reading I'm having of Across the Lake. It was published on Thursday. So when I say it's hot off the press, it's like still warm, yeah? So I'm excited about this. I've been waiting a long time to bring this book to the public, and you're the very first audience to hear about this particular book. So I did extensive research on this place here, on Ravensbrück, and I did 3 separate research trips to Berlin and to Ravensbrück, and I did this because I wanted the book to be as historically accurate as possible. This is even more important because it's fiction. The characters I'm writing about, they didn't exist, but they very easily could have. So it was very important for me that everything that happened to my characters, my fictitious characters, were rooted and grounded in things that really did happen at Ravensbrück. So that was important for me. So I'm really grateful to the agencies. I got about $10,000 in grant money to go over to Germany on 3 separate occasions. And I was very grateful to the curators at Ravensbrück for talking with me and answering questions and looking through some of the archives. And Ravensbrück is unique because it's the only all-female concentration camp that was in the Third Reich. And it's also the only concentration camp, this is so strange that I didn't believe it at first, where you can spend the night. And I did. I spent several nights sleeping at Ravensbrück. And in fact, I slept in the former quarters of the female guards. And at first, this seemed a little distasteful to me, I'll be honest, yes? Because the crematoria was 200 yards away from the room I was staying in, and it was a room that one of the guards used to have. And then I talked to the person that was running these facilities, and she said, well, it's a youth hostel, and the survivors wanted it to become a youth hostel, so it was a place that they could gather, and more importantly, become a place of education for German children. And once I heard that, it seemed an appropriate use of that particular space. So I'll show you some of the places that I was at Ravensbrück. But my first 2 novels, The Commandant of Lubitsch, which, don't feel badly, Cricket, no one knows how to pronounce that. If I could have a do-over, I'd just call that novel The Commandant. That was a novel about Operation Reinhardt, which were the death camps like, and I'm just curious, raise your hand if you've heard of the concentration camp Belzec. How about Sobibor? Treblinka? Yeah, that one sort of registers a little bit more. In those 3 camps, there was no selection process. The train pulled in, and everyone on that train was murdered in about 60 minutes. And just in those 3 camps alone, 2 million people died. A third of the Holocaust was just in those 3 camps. And there are reasons why you haven't heard about those camps, but that's what The Commandant of Lubitsch is about. I wanted to explore Operation Reinhardt. My second novel was In the Shadow of Dora, and it's about the real-life connections between the Holocaust and the Apollo program. And I'll just sort of leave that you can buy the book and sort of see what those real life connections are. But it's been buried by American history. Americans don't want to think about those particular connections. But as I was finishing up In the Shadow of Dora, I thought, what I write about, my characters are most of them are men, and it occurred to me that my understanding of the Holocaust is very gendered, and I think that's probably true for many people when they consider the Holocaust. The sort of male gaze, and we don't really think about the female prisoners, probably don't think at all about the female guards, called the Aufseherin. And that's when I first ran across Ravensbrück. I was doing research for my second novel, and I thought, well, it's only an hour and a half away, so I went up just to see the place. And while I was walking around Ravensbrück, the idea of maybe my third novel should be about gender and what it meant to be a woman, a Jewish woman or a German woman in the Holocaust. So that's some of the things I'll be showing you. So what I intend to do is I'm going to read from the novel for the first time, and it's just like 4 pages. It'll help set the stage. And then I've got, I can't remember, 12 photos or something like that, and I'll sort of walk through what it is you're seeing. And then I may or may not read another portion of the novel that will be about 4 pages. We'll see how talkative I am and if I'm blowing past my time. But I do want to leave room for Q&A, because there are always questions about the Holocaust. And I give a lot of lectures on Auschwitz, and every single time I give my lecture on Auschwitz, every single time, there are things that I mention about that camp that people think they know Auschwitz, and then I give the short, brief history, and it's like people are like, I had no idea that this happened, and this happened, and this happened. So I'm going to start by reading from the middle of the novel, and it's actually a bit of nonfiction, which I know is kind of strange. It's a fiction book, but there's a chapter right in the middle that's nonfiction. And I did that intentionally because the reader can only know Ravensbrück from the characters that they are presented with. And I wanted to pan back so that the reader, you, could get a greater idea of the totality of Ravensbrück. So this seems also like a good introduction. Yeah, so it's about 4 pages. So chapter 7, A Woman's Place. Ravensbrück did not fall from the sky. It was planned, it was built, it was managed. The only all-female concentration camp in the Third Reich was so large and complex that no single person, whether they were a prisoner or a guard, could possibly know it all. By the end of the war, it sprawled deep into the woods, but it all began one day with a simple architectural drawing on a draftsman's desk. It started with a ruler, a T-square, and a pencil. In November 1938, boundary markers were staked out next to Lake Schwedt, an idyllic body of water ringed by spruce, pine, and oak trees. The nearby church bells of Fürstenberg echoed across the water, and it was common to see storks soaring across the sky. Soon a massive courtyard was built by prisoners, and this was surrounded by a rising wall of concrete. An enormous iron gate was fitted onto hinges. Lime trees were planted to create the Lagerstrasse, the wide avenue that cut through the camp. And this would become the main thoroughfare which funneled the women to work. Hammers and cross-cut saws were brought out to create barracks. Electrified fencing was fitted into place, and a generator hummed to life. Architects stood around, smoking. They consulted blueprints and pointed at what they still needed to rise up from imagination. Trucks loaded down with bricks and iron kept on coming. Roads were graded smooth by prisoners. Stone staircases were fitted into hills, and homes for the SS were constructed. A large plaza was laid out before the administration building, and a flagpole was sunk into the soil. A Nazi flag was tied onto snap hooks, and it was slowly raised. It fluttered and flapped in the crisp wind. Ravensbrück officially opened in 1939, the same year the war started, and when the Soviets finally liberated the camp on April 30, 1945, it had grown to monstrous size. It had expanded far beyond its original blueprint, and it had become a center of gravity for the number of subcamps. Rail lines were laid out in the woods. Huge wooden warehouses with wide platforms were assembled near the tracks, and goods were stacked high. These were things that had either been stolen from the prisoners or they were products the prisoners had been forced to make. Things like socks, blankets, electrical components, shirts, fuses, mats, and servo motors. During its ruthless years of operation, some 132,000 women passed through the gates of Ravensbrück. At least a third of them perished. Those parts of the camp that belonged to the SS and the Aufseherin were made functional and attractive. There was an Art Deco gas station near the administration building, along with rows of fine garages that kept a fleet of Mercedes safe during thunderstorms. As for the administration building itself, it had a large foyer with a huge painted swastika and eagle on the wall. Beyond that were two wide wooden staircases. They rose to mid-floor and then merged to become one set of stairs that lifted up to the second floor. A stained glass window was on the landing, and when the sun hit it just right, pools of color shimmered on the oak parquet floor. The upstairs corridor was long and clean. Flags stood at attention, and plaques were on the walls. The commandant's office was in the corner of the upper floor, and his desk was positioned so that he sat with the windows at his back. There was the sound of typewriters and the occasional flare of a telephone ringing. The wooden floors had wool carpets scattered about, and there was the frequent smell of cigarettes, brandy, and aftershave. Boots clicked quickly off the wood floor, silenced now and then by carpets, only to click off wood again. There was a small room for tea and biscuits, as well as a larger room for dinners that required fine china and silverware. It wasn't just the working spaces of Ravensbrück that had an air of wealth and gentility to them, because the men who ran the camp also had luxury at home. The SS had family houses built on a low hill near the administration building. Stone stairways climbed up to these mountain chalets, and in each of them was a wide fireplace, handsomely carved wooden ceilings, a kitchen, a dining area, and a bathroom with a toilet. A set of stairs curved up to the second floor, which had 3 bedrooms. A balcony was off the master bedroom, and there were ceiling fans. Wives and children lived here and made their way into town for shopping and school. At night, as they climbed into their beds, an orange glow came from the crematoria chimney. There was the constant smell of burning kielbasa and grapefruit in the air. No one needed to ask what was being put into the ovens. As for the Aufseherin, they had barracks that could hardly be called barracks at all. They looked like something out of a mountain scene in Switzerland: white walls, carved wood, and pretty flower boxes. There was a front porch with seats to enjoy the view of the lake, and inside there were cozy front rooms. Down the hall was a kitchen and individual bedrooms. Newspapers like Völkische Beobachter and Das Schwarze Korps were delivered each morning along with milk. A mirror was next to the front door so that the Aufseherin could check to see if their coiffed hair was properly arranged under their caps. Construction at Ravensbrück was relentless. Ever since the first boundary marker was hammered into the sandy ground, there was need for more buildings, more roads, more housing, more rail tracks, more barracks. Just a few years after opening, Ravensbrück had factories full of sewing machines. It had villas, gardens, kitchens, huge laundry facilities, kennels, storage depots, a shoe repair shop, a furniture repair shop, a painter shed, and a water treatment plant. It had potato cellars and a mat weaving factory, a thread spinning workshop, huge hutches full of Angora rabbits, a telephone exchange, an electrical substation, and a furrier shop that made winter hats out of Angora wool. It had warehouses next to rail line, gasoline tanks, a massive sand pit, a coal bunker, chicken coops, and medical facilities that almost certainly killed more women than it cured. There was also an SS canteen that served gourmet food, a 2-story prison known as the bunker for those women who required special punishment, and there was a crematorium that had 3 coal-fired ovens. At least 1 gas chamber was at Ravensbrück, and the guards called it the New Laundry. Built in early 1945, it was given its euphemistic name, of course, to hide its lethal function. This secret concrete room could hold 150 women, and according to camp survivors, it was dynamited by the SS on April 23, 1945, in order to pretend that it had never been built in the first place. There are rumors that several rail cars were hidden in the woods near Ravensbrück and that they were used as mobile gas chambers. While this is certainly within the realm of possibility, especially near the end of the war, when the population in the camp soared, there is no definitive proof beyond the adamant testimony of survivors. This, however, is the nature of mobile gas chambers. They are meant to be moved, and in that moving, the reality of their existence is taken with them. They disappear into fog and silence, dragging facts with them. So I'll sort of stop there. There's a little more I could have read, but I want to make sure that I could show you some of the photos, and maybe I'll read another passage. You can be introduced to my characters. So the Aufseherin were the female guards, and they were every bit as ruthless and brutal as their male counterparts in places like Auschwitz and Buchenwald and Dachau. The Aufsehren were not a part of the SS because the SS was a thoroughly patriarchal organization. They didn't allow women into the SS. But the Aufsehren, which translated as like auxiliary, so they were not a part of the SS, but they helped run the camp. You may have noticed when I was reading this that Ravensbrück was run by men administratively, but they had female guards and female prisoners. So they didn't trust the women to run the camp themselves. Yeah? The women also couldn't carry guns because only men are allowed to carry guns. So it's a very gendered sort of thing that's going on here. So I have two main characters, and this narrative, it's a braided narrative. So you read one chapter and you get to know one character, and then you read the second chapter and it's another character, and it goes back and forth. So chapter 1 opens with, her name is Anna, and she's an Aufseherin, and it's her first day on the job as a female guard at Ravensbrück. And she's nervous because she wants to do a good job. Yeah? Chapter 2 takes place in the barracks of the prisoners. My main character's name is Svea, and I really like Svea. I really grew to like her an awful lot. It was really hard to see the really bad things that happened to Svea. And then chapter 3, we're back to Anna. So it goes back and forth, and this means the reader has almost like a godlike view. The reader knows things about these characters they don't know about each other. And as the plot progresses, it becomes very clear to the reader very fast that there is going to be a collision between these two characters. And if I've done my job right, hopefully you read this in 1 or 2 sittings. Yeah? There's a lot of narrative energy here. Okay, so what you've been looking at, this is the administration building. And it hasn't changed an awful lot. When the Soviets liberated Ravensbrück on April 30, 1945, they turned it into a military installation, and it stayed that way until German reunification in 1990. So the German government, after reunification, they put quite a bit of money into Ravensbrück to try to get it back to the state that it was. So everything you're going to be seeing is original. So the camp commandant's office, second floor, up there on the left, and I have a number of scenes that actually take place in the administration building. Anna goes in there because she's got to talk to the camp commandant. Here's that Lagerstrasse that I was talking about. Lager, you might be thinking of beer, but Lager in German actually means camp. So this is the camp street, and it cuts right through the heart of the camp. You can see the barracks here, and there were just hundreds and hundreds of women crammed into these barracks. And that's the Lagerstrasse there. And you can see the women are sort of digging some trenches for irrigation and whatnot. And like any other concentration camp, it was brutal, it was awful, it was lice, there was great fear of typhus, there was the constant fear of being beaten to death, because although the Aufsehren didn't have guns, they did have dogs and they had truncheons, and they killed with those. So you can see these original buildings up on the left. This is where the prisoners were forced to stitch socks or to make mats. My character Svea in chapter 4, you meet her, and she's actually in the sock factory where she's got to do a 12-hour shift under just horrible conditions. And she and some of the women around her, they are sabotaging these socks because these socks are destined for the Eastern Front. And they want to make life as miserable as possible for the German soldiers. Like maybe they blow out the toe on the sock, and then suddenly that's not going to be very pleasant, right? So they're subtle forms of sabotage, which of course, if they're caught, they'd probably be killed. There's the sock factory. There's a photo of what it looked like back in the day, and then what it sort of looks like now. So one of the reasons I went to Ravensbrück 3 times was to figure out what the camp looked like. But the third and final time that I went, the book had already been written, and I went back just to make sure that I had everything as absolutely correct as I possibly could. And I found out there were a couple things I had misremembered, the way a staircase sort of looked. Things on the wall that just like human memory, we're all fallible to these kind of things. So the third trip was really to reassure me that I can send this book out and it's historically accurate. And here's the construction of the Aufsehren barracks. This is taken in 1940. Someone's obviously on top of the administration building, which is the first slide that you saw. And those buildings are now hostels. Yeah. So you see the one on the left-hand side there. One of the nights that I spent a total of 3 or 4 nights there, but that's the one that I slept in. And what you can't see is about 200 yards off screen is going to be the crematorium and the crematorium smokestack. And that's what they look like today. If I was to take you here, I don't think you would realize that these are original buildings and that they were used by the female guards. And for the female guards, most of them had dropped out of school. Most of them they came from a working class background, and for almost all of them, this was a step up where they had their own room, they had money, they had servants, yeah? That's the inside of one of the barracks. They've kept one as a place to go and to learn about the Evzera and to find out what life was like. But all the other ones have been converted into a place that you can sleep with the bathrooms and things like that. And that's where I was. You see, there's my computer. I'm doing research. I'm writing. I'm about halfway through the first draft here. This is the first time that I went. But I'm actually in one of the Evzera rooms. There would have been at least one female guard, but maybe 2 would have stayed in this room. This is what it looked like in April 1945, roughly about the time that it was liberated. And one of the reasons that I call this across the lake is the town of Furstenberg, a beautiful, imagine like a German town, right? The old buildings, the spires, the church bells, the beer gardens, I mean, whatever you have in your head, stereotypically German, that's what Furstenberg looked like, yeah? And then there's a beautiful lake, and quite literally across the lake was Ravensbrück. And I've been in Furstenberg, and I have looked across the lake at Ravensbrück, and you can clearly see the crematorium. You'd clearly be able to see the smoke. You would hear the barking dogs. You would hear small arms gunfire, because although the women didn't carry guns, the men did. And so often the SS would execute, a prisoner here and there. Ravensbrück had a number of sub-camps. This is the Siemens camp, and if you've heard of the Siemens Corporation, which is still around today, they hired out prisoners. This is slave labor we're talking about. The women at Ravensbrück, they didn't get paid, right? But the Siemens Corporation built a separate camp kind of outside of Ravensbrück, and they created electrical components for what would eventually be put into the V-2 rockets that were assembled at Dora Mittelbau. And this is what my second novel is about. Dora Mittelbau, it sounds like I'm making this up, but I'm not. Dora Mittelbau was a secret underground concentration camp, the largest underground camp space in the world at that point in time. And this is where the Germans built their V-2 rockets, which would later rain down on London. And the men who built the V-2 rocket were brought over to America to build the Saturn V. Yeah? Same guys. Yeah? We got to the moon because of Nazi technology. So this is the Siemens camp, and there's the railway I was talking about. The mobile gas chambers, I have no reason to believe that they didn't exist. That I'm positive. I have no proof, but that sounds very possible to me. That would have been the rail track that it would have been used on. Here's an SS officer's house. And again, everything that you're seeing is original. There's an original photo. But I have a scene set in here where my character, Anna, she's 19, attractive. She's asked to go to a party full of the higher-ups in the SS. And there's a scene that takes place right there. Because I wanted to investigate what it meant to be a female prisoner and a Jewish prisoner, but I also wanted to investigate, well, what would it have been like to be a woman in the Third Reich? And of course, the crematoria and the gas chamber. You're looking at rose beds here. The camp was liberated in 1945, and it wasn't until 1950, maybe 1951, that they decided to cover up the ash. The ash was just dumped there. So you're looking at the final resting place for tens of thousands of women, maybe upwards to 50,000. And quite literally, there's Furstenberg across the lake. So there are a number of things I'm investigating in this novel, and I wrote it with tight narrative energy because I wanted the pages to move, and I wanted the reader to feel that sense of urgency that is a part of being in a concentration camp. And I wanted to explore gender, but I also wanted to explain, how was it possible for the Germans to know what's going on and pretend that it wasn't happening? I'm here to tell you that even the camps that are deep in the woods, they knew exactly what was happening. I mean, how could they not? Trains are full of human beings. There's great fires at night. And the train is empty. Where are they taking these people? Yeah? So, how am I doing for time, Cricket? Where'd you go? 20 minutes. Okay. How about I'd like to introduce you to one of my characters anyway, and then I would love to open it up for questions. And it can be about the book, my writing process, the Holocaust in general. So think about questions, yeah? So I'm just going to read chapter 1 to you, and this is the very first time this will have been read in public, which is kind of why I want to do it, so sorry. So chapter 1, A Bright Future. Anna applied lipstick and studied herself in the mirror. She opened her mouth and made sure she hadn't accidentally stained her front teeth. Another daub of firecracker red to her Cupid's bow. The salesgirl in Berlin had called the top of her lip that, and she took a step back. She let her arms hang at her sides as she turned to the left, to the right. The mouse gray uniform looked good on her, she had to admit that. It was designed to make them all look the same, of course, but there was no denying that the buttoned-up jacket, skirt, and peaked cap brought out her best features: waist, hips, chest. She smiled and cocked her head. Why, she could be a poster for the perfect Aryan woman: blonde hair, blue eyes, straight nose, dimples. Men found her attractive. She knew this, and when she hit puberty, she found them watching her as she crossed the street or boarded a tram. Whenever she entered a pastry shop, their eyes lingered on her legs as if she were sweetness behind glass. Anna did a slow turn and made sure her hair was pinned just right. She touched it with both hands and adjusted her cap to a jaunty angle. "There," she said to her reflection. "Ready for your first day?" She capped her lipstick and placed it into a small pocket. Soon she would be on display for the prisoners, yes, of course, but there were also men in the camp to think about. Good men who had been with the SS for many years, career men, men who liked boxing, hiking, shooting. Perhaps if she... Anna let the thought evaporate, and she looked at some paperwork on the night table. When she arrived into camp late last night, she spread out her orders to convince herself that this new life was really happening. She stared at the top line now. Aufseherin, Hartmann, Johanna, born 1924 Berlin, post of duty, Ravensbrück, date of duty, 19 May 1943. Was she doing the right thing? Surely it was okay to be nervous, maybe even a little bit scared on her first day. What would it be like to guard prisoners? What would it be like to hit them? Could she do it? Was she tough enough? She pushed the thought aside. She had worked too hard, and she would just have to trust in her training. She was tough, she nodded to her reflection. Not every woman was accepted to be an Aufseherin, and it was an honor to wear the uniform of a female guard in a concentration camp. Anna picked up her rubber truncheon and saw her eyes narrow in the mirror. Her dimples sank. It had all started in a bakery. That's where she saw the sign, next to the honey rolls, asking for female guards. There was a swastika and a young woman who looked out at a golden horizon. Healthy female workers between 20 and 30 wanted for military site. Good pay, clothing, free room and board, single women only. And here she was. The sun was just beginning to rise, and a cool breeze was coming through the window. It fluttered the orders on the night table, and she went over to place a paperback onto them. It was a romance novel. The heroine was on the French Riviera, and she had just had her luggage stolen in a train station. She was stranded and alone in a foreign country. Anna wondered what would happen next. That, however, would have to wait until the evening when she returned to barracks. Barracks, she thought, looking around. It didn't look like the kind of place that housed soldiers, though. These were more like medieval houses or villas or cute mountain chalets. Each one was painted white, and they were decorated with wooden shutters. There were 8 villas in front of the main entrance to the camp, and each one had 10 single bedrooms. A single communal kitchen was down the hall, and each floor had a bathroom. There was an open space with chairs in the middle of each floor, and there was a fireplace. It was cozy. And since these villas had only been built a few years ago, everything was fresh and clean. The smell of new wood was still in the air. Anna studied her corner room and smiled. It was tidy, and everything had its place. Her bed was made to regulation standard, the duvet folded just so, and outside her window she could hear ducks landing on Lake Schwedt. The horizon was turning pink. Across the lake, in the town of Fürstenberg, church bells chimed the hour, 0500. When the wind picked up, waves shushed against the shore. The lights of the administration building cast panes of yellow on the gravel, and she watched a black Mercedes roll up to the front door. The world was full of blue morning shadow, and, almost against her will, she looked at the tall chimney on her right. She knew exactly what it was, but didn't see the point in dwelling on it very much. There was a low rumbling sound as tarry black smoke spilled up into the sky. Sometimes there were sparks and licks of fire. Last night, as she tried to fall asleep, the constant low thundering kept her awake. She'd get used to it, she told herself, turning away. At least it's better than working in a factory, she said out loud. Anna studied the laces on her boots, and then with both hands she snapped the front of her jacket against her chest. She liked the gray color. It made her skin look more milky. She also liked what the culotte-style skirt did to her hips and waist. Yes, a new life, she thought, reaching for her orders. She was an adult now, and she had a good job, good pay, meals that someone else cooked, and laundry that someone else washed. She even had an allowance for travel. She looked around her room. Her room. Inside the wardrobe were old civilian clothes that she didn't need anymore. When she officially became an Officerin a few days ago, they had given her 2 pairs of leather boots, 3 blouses, several stockings, a cap, and respect. Not bad for a girl who came from nothing. She glanced at a framed photo of Hitler bolted to the wall. He wasn't exactly a handsome leader, but he was a strong father to the nation. Why not follow him? He had created the largest empire since the Kaiser, and now all of Europe was like wax in his hands. He came from humble beginnings, too, born in a stable, she had been told, and he promised the 2 things any society needed for safety, guns and butter. She remembered the day when he seized power. The church bells rang for hours all across Germany. She looked at his toothbrush mustache and took it as a sign that he was a true man of the people, that he had come from the lower class, and that he enjoyed beer halls. Thoughts of her own father scuttled into her head, but she turned her back on them and went over to the windows. She closed it, flipped the lock, and snapped the drapes neatly back into place. National Socialism had given her much. Not only was it an escape from a life she did not want, but the Nazi movement was exciting because it was a youth movement. Her generation was working hard to create a new Germany. They were agents of change in a corrupt world, and they were sweeping away all that was unwanted and dirty. She had learned all of this on camping trips with the League of German Maidens when she was a girl. In a blue skirt, white blouse, and a kerchief that was held in place with a leather knot, they played tennis, swam in a pool, and went on long marches in the woods. At night, they sat around a bonfire and talked about what it meant to be a woman. Frau Pfeiffer asked them questions about proper breeding and who had the right to call themselves a German citizen. They read parts of Mein Kampf. They talked about the virtue of bearing children. Anna looked down at the orders in her hands. Imagine that, an entire generation devoted to the Fuhrer. It felt good to swap her girlish uniform for something more powerful, more adult, more womanly. Wearing her mouse gray jacket and dress wasn't about conformity. It was about uniformity. They were in this together. A voice called from behind, "Anna, you coming? It's time for roll call." It was her floor mate and new friend, Ruth. She was also from Berlin, and she was also excited about becoming a guard that would protect the Reich. "I'm coming." Anna smiled, squared her shoulders, and walked across her room. Her culotte skirt swished around her knees, and her heavy boots thumped on the wooden floor. She liked the feeling. She left the door unlocked and hurried down the stairs. A bright future awaited her. So, how am I doing for time now? 10 minutes? Perfect. I would love to answer any questions you have about the book, the Holocaust, my writing process. Yeah. A lot, a lot. I would say on average, most of my novels go through about 7 or 8 drafts, and that's before I send it to my editor. And then after that, she's always got something to say. Yeah, I teach at Augustana, and I talk about what's the difference between proofreading and editing. And I think many of my freshmen see them as being the same thing. And I'm like, no, they definitely are not. Yeah.
As I understand it, women were sent to camps all over Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Why was it that this particular one was created at all? And were there certain characteristics that would mean that a particular woman would be sent to this camp?
And the answer to that is there was a wide range of women that were sent to Ravensbrück. They could be criminals, they could be work shy, they could be prostitutes, they could be Jewish, they could be Jehovah's Witnesses, but they were sent there largely because, well, Heinrich Himmler, who was in charge of the SS, had a very patriarchal views of men and women, right? And initially, Ravensbrück was set up with the idea that women will be sent to Ravensbrück, and they're going to do women's work. We're going to force them to make socks, make mats, do all of the things that you shouldn't be doing. Like, we'll leave all the heavy labor to the men, and they're going to be in places like Auschwitz and Buchenwald. And Auschwitz specifically was designed, of course, to murder the Jews, right? The Holocaust, we have to start with the anti-Semitism. So there were plenty of women that were sent to Auschwitz. I don't want to say all, but a sizable portion of them were Jewish. And there were Jewish women at Ravensbrück, and the Nazis tried to purge Ravensbrück in their mind to make it Judenrein, which is Judenrein, how do you translate that? Pure of Jews, or freed of Jews, cleansed of Jews. So they would send thousands of Jewish women from Ravensbrück off to Auschwitz, but within a matter of a few months, there would be more Jewish women at Ravensbrück. So, I mean, the Third Reich is a patriarchal institution, and they had very definite views of what a women's role should be. I mean, it's a fascist state. Yeah.
I started reading the book this morning. I got part of the second chapter read, and you mentioned that part of your purpose was to examine gender roles. And what it struck me that when I started reading about the other character, who's one of the prisoners,
Yeah.
very identical thoughts going through her mind, the same as the first character.
I'm glad you noticed that. Thank you, John. Yes. That was not accidental.
Well, obviously it could have been.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost word for word, like what do you call that?
Yeah, the Cupid's bow.
Cupid's bow. They both had that
Yeah.
idea. So I just wanted you to comment a little bit more about that. Gender, a little broader than just, Nazi. I don't even know what I'm asking, but
Yeah, well, and one of the questions, if I'm going to embark on something like a novel, it always starts with a question, and I call them the needs, and I write down what those are. Like, what do I want the reader to be thinking about when they finish the last page? I start there with what do I want the reader to engage with and consider, and gender is certainly one of them. But I also was just curious. Well, I know how the men acted in the barracks of Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Dora Mittelbau, but I was like, did the women act differently to each other? And the answer is yes, they did. They were, by and large, more helpful, more communal. They would risk their lives by making presents for each other as a way to hang on to their humanity. They would make recipes and memorize those recipes, and they would pretend to cook while they're making the socks, and they would try to create a space where they could be together, where the men largely were sort of on their own, right? They didn't have that sense of community. So I was curious about that. And I was also curious, like, how would a 19-year-old girl like Anna, and Svea is only a few years older than her, how would she slide into brutality? So I'm not giving anything away, but Anna has some choices to make. She's either going to wrap her arms around Ravensbrück and see opportunity, or she's going to see horror and turn away from Ravensbrück. Yeah.
Is there anything you have to do as a part of your process or afterwards to sort of detox from going to such a dark place to empathize with characters doing or thinking dark or brutal things?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because this is now my third Holocaust novel, and I have been doing this for 15 years. Someone asked me recently how many camps I've gone to do research, and the answer is 12. And it's very hard. It's one thing to see photos of Auschwitz. I'm just here to tell you it is an entirely different thing to walk the soil of that place. So for 15 years, I've sort of been living with this. And I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but I see the Holocaust. Like, I drive across the prairie and I see the trains, right? Ethanol plant, I see the smoke, right? I see the Yankees playing and the pinstripe suit, So I've decided that I'm stepping away from the Holocaust for a little bit after Across the Lake. There's something nice about 3 novels, and they each do something a little bit different. So my next project, I'm writing about my home state of Minnesota, and it's a travelogue, and I get to be funny, and I get to interview quirky people and go to quirky places, and that has been phenomenal. I'm in the middle of writing a chapter on the Minnesota State Fair and the joys of eating cheese curds. So it's doing me a lot of good. Yeah.
The German people who opposed the Holocaust, what forms did that take? What did they do? I really never heard of them.
Yeah, and there were some movements, and now, of course, in Germany, these people are celebrated as heroes, and they absolutely were. The White Rose Society was a bunch of college students that handed out, they hid pamphlets around Berlin, and they were only 19, 20, 21 years old, and when they were caught, they were hanged with piano wire. Yeah, Klaus von Stauffenberg is a general, and if maybe you've heard of Operation Valkyrie, there was a movie that Tom Cruise did. It came out a couple of years ago. It's mostly accurate. But there was that as well. And Stauffenberg now is celebrated as a hero who fought against Hitler. But, to live in a fascist state like that is, if you are going to speak up, it's very easy for us to do that, I think, with the safety of free speech. But to speak up in Nazi Germany, I mean, it's not just you that's going to prison, getting tortured, and sent to a concentration camp. It's very likely it's going to happen to your family as well. This isn't me forgiving the Germans, because after all, they created the Third Reich. But I take that into account, because I've done the thought experiment of, like, what would I do in a situation like this? And I would like to think I'd be brave enough. I would like to think I'd be brave enough. But who can know? I have a 14-year-old son. I want to protect him. Yeah? Yeah.
Can you tell more about the survivors' history and story of this place now, where you could go stay? I mean, how did that all come about?
The hostel opened sometime in the 1990s. So it was after reunification, and the survivors of Ravensbrück, I mean, they were, just the 1990s. I mean, the survivors of the Holocaust we have now, they were children. So if we have Holocaust survivors, the teenagers at best. So in the 1990s, these women would still be getting advanced in age, and that's one of the reasons they wanted it to become a hostel, so that they could gather every year to celebrate the fact that they survived, and more importantly, to remember the lives of those who didn't. Yeah. But it was strange when I was at this hostel, because I'm inside the boundaries of Ravensbrück, and I'm seeing kids playing football. We call it soccer. And I was like, I watched them for like 5 or 10 minutes. I was like, I couldn't decide if I liked that image or didn't like that image. I was like, you shouldn't play in Ravensbrück, but you're here learning about the place. It's very odd. Yeah. When I was at Auschwitz doing some research, I saw a group of Israeli school kids, and they weren't being very disrespectful, in my opinion. They were kind of shoving each other and flirting with each other. And there were 2 men from the Israeli army with machine guns walking around Auschwitz with them. And when I saw that, I was like, that's the power of this place. They don't feel that they can come to Auschwitz without a military attaché with them. Yeah? You had a question?
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned it. Where exactly is this located?
Oh, thank you. I should have mentioned that. It's about 90 minutes north of Berlin. It's in Germany. And one of the problems that I had with this particular camp is the history of Ravensbrück is really unlike any other camp that I've run across, because as the borders of Germany began to collapse, as they started to lose the war, more and more women were being sent to Ravensbrück. To the point, in 1944, they didn't have enough barracks, and they were almost exclusively Jewish women. And they just erected a huge circus tent and told them, don't leave. And they starved to death. Yeah? And that was a story that I had never heard of until I started studying Ravensbrück. Are we out of time? Okay. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a real joy for me to talk about this difficult book, so thank you for being here.